Welcome to Detective Reddington's office. Take a seat and listen to this story. It will be interesting. I didn't want to believe it at first. Hell, I thought I was being paranoid, maybe reading too much into things. But there were small signs. You know the kind, the ones you try to brush off until they pile up and hit you in the face. That's where I was with my wife, Emily. We've been married for 5 years, and things were good, or at least I thought they were. But recently, she's been distant, like she's in her own world. It started with little things. Emily always left her phone lying around the house, on the couch, kitchen table, anywhere. But lately, that changed. She started keeping it with her, almost glued to her side. At first, I didn't think much of it. People get busy. But the more I noticed it, the more it bugged me. She'd get a text, glance at it, and immediately put the phone face down. That was new. One night, after dinner, I asked her about her day, just trying to make small talk. She was vague, talking about work and how stressful things had been. I tried to offer some support, but she brushed it off. "It's nothing I can't handle," she said. But there was something in her voice that didn't sit right with me. Then there were the late nights. Emily works as a graphic designer, so there are times when she gets swamped with projects and has to stay late. I understood that. But recently, the late nights became more frequent, too frequent. She'd say she was working late at the office. But when I'd call, she wouldn't pick up. When I asked her about it, she'd brush me off, saying she was too busy to answer. It didn't make sense, but I let it go. The final straw came last Friday. We had plans to go out for dinner, something we hadn't done in a while because of how busy she'd been. She texted me an hour before saying she had to work late again. That's when it hit me. Something wasn't right. I don't know what it was, but I had this sinking feeling in my gut. I decided to do something I'd never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. I know, it's wrong. And I felt sick even considering it, but I had to know. That night, when she went to take a shower, she left her phone on the counter. I grabbed it, my hands shaking. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe just some texts about work, something to put my mind at ease. But what I found, well, it confirmed my worst fears. There were texts from someone named Jake, the kind of texts that weren't about work. They weren't explicit, but they were too friendly, too personal. There were messages like, "Can't wait to see you again," and "Last night was amazing." My heart sank. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't just me being paranoid. She was seeing someone else. I didn't confront her that night. Couldn't. Instead, I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of it all. How had I missed the signs? How long had this been going on? The next few days felt like living in a fog. I'd go to work, try to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to those messages. "Can't wait to see you again." Who the hell was this Jake? And how long had this been going on behind my back? I tried to stay calm, tried to think logically, but it felt like I was spiraling. Emily didn't seem to notice anything different. Or maybe she did and just didn't care enough to hide it anymore. She kept going about her day like nothing had changed, like we weren't living in two completely different realities. The nights were the worst, lying next to her in bed, pretending like I didn't know she was sneaking around with someone else. Every time her phone buzzed, my heart raced. Was it him? Was she texting him while I was sitting right there? I thought about confronting her a dozen times. I even started rehearsing it in my head, how I'd call her out, make her admit everything. But each time I thought about it, I froze. Part of me didn't want to know the whole truth. I wasn't ready to face whatever excuse or lie she'd throw at me. Besides, I didn't have real proof yet, just some suspicious messages. So I waited. I watched. I paid attention to every little thing, hoping she'd slip up. Then it happened. It was a Wednesday night. Emily had told me she was going to meet some friends from work for drinks. Normally, I wouldn't have questioned it, but with everything going on, I had a hard time believing her. I casually asked who she was meeting, trying to play it cool. She mentioned a couple of names I recognized, but my gut told me she wasn't being entirely honest. After she left, I sat there in the empty living room, staring at the door. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't just sit back and let this happen anymore. I needed to know for sure. So, I grabbed my keys and decided to follow her. I felt like an idiot doing it, like some cliché character in a bad movie, but I couldn't stop myself. I drove around for a while, not sure where she'd gone. I didn't know exactly where her friends were meeting up, but I had a hunch. There was this bar downtown where we used to go a lot, but recently, she had been going there without me. Said it was a work thing. That was my first stop. When I got there, my heart was pounding in my chest. I parked a little down the street and walked toward the entrance, trying to stay out of sight. I felt ridiculous, but my instincts were screaming at me that something wasn't right. And there she was, sitting at the bar, laughing. But she wasn't with her work friends. She was with him, Jake. I didn't need to guess. It was clear who he was. They were sitting way too close, talking in that way people do when they think no one's watching. I stood there for a second, frozen, feeling the air get sucked out of my lungs. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to walk right up to them, to make a scene, to throw the whole thing in her face. But I couldn't. Instead, I turned around and walked out, my hands shaking as I got back to my car. I sat there for a while, trying to process what I'd just seen. It was real. It wasn't just in my head. She was cheating on me, right there in front of my face. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about every moment we'd had together, replaying the last few months in my mind, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. How long had she been lying to me? How many nights had she gone to work events or drinks with friends when she was really with him? By the time morning came, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. It was time to confront her. I needed answers. I deserved answers. The next morning, I woke up early, my heart pounding. I had spent the entire night replaying what I saw at the bar. The image of Emily with Jake burned into my mind. There was no avoiding it now. I had to confront her, even if it tore everything apart. Emily was still asleep when I got out of bed. I stood there for a minute, watching her, feeling the anger and betrayal simmer beneath the surface. How could she sleep so peacefully while everything she'd built with me was crumbling? I couldn't wait any longer. "Emily, wake up," I said, my voice cold, sharper than I intended. She stirred, groaning a little as she opened her eyes. "What's going on?" she mumbled, clearly still half asleep. "I need to talk to you. Now." The seriousness in my voice must have woken her up completely because she sat up quickly, her expression confused and a little panicked. "What is it?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch between us. Then, without warning, the words came spilling out. "I know about Jake." The color drained from her face instantly. She didn't even try to hide it. Her eyes widened, and for a second, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. There was no point in denying it now. She knew she was caught. What are you talking about?" she stammered, trying to regain her composure. "Don't play dumb, Emily," I snapped. "I saw you last night, at the bar, with him." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out what to say, how to explain this away. But there was no explanation that would make this okay. "I followed you," I continued, my voice steady. "You weren't with your work friends. You were with him. I saw you, Emily. You were laughing, sitting close, like you didn't have a care in the world." She sat there, frozen, the guilt all over her face. Finally, she let out a long, shaky breath. "Ethan, I can explain." I felt a wave of anger rush through me. Explain? What could you possibly say that would make this okay? She was quiet for a moment, her eyes filling with tears. "It's not what you think," she whispered. I laughed bitterly. "Not what I think. Emily, I saw you with him. I read the texts. How long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me?" She wiped at her eyes, trying to stop the tears from falling. It's been a few months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far. A few months. She'd been lying to me for months." "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my voice shaking with rage. "You made a choice, Emily. Over and over again, you chose to go behind my back. Don't pretend this was an accident. She sobbed quietly, her head in her hands. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice flat. You hurt me the moment you decided to betray me. I stood there, watching her cry, and felt nothing. No sympathy, no sadness. Just anger and emptiness. This was the woman I had built my life with, the woman I thought I could trust more than anyone in the world. And she had thrown it all away for someone else. Why, Emily? I asked, my voice breaking for the first time. Why did you do this? What wasn't enough for you? She looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and guilt. I don't know, she whispered. I don't have a good answer. I felt lost. I didn't think you noticed me anymore. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't notice you? I repeated. I've been working my ass off to build a future for us. For you. How could you say I didn't notice you? I don't know, Ethan, she cried. It just happened. I made a mistake. I didn't think it would go this far. I shook my head, disgusted. A mistake? You didn't accidentally fall into an affair. You chose this. She didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. I stood there for a few more minutes, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. Finally, I spoke. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I said quietly. I don't know if I can forgive you. Her eyes filled with panic. Ethan, please, she begged. Don't say that. We can fix this. I'll end it with Jake. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. But I couldn't even look at her anymore. I turned away, walking out of the bedroom and leaving her sobbing behind me. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what to do next. After I walked out of the bedroom, the house felt suffocating. Every room reminded me of the life we'd built together, the one I thought was solid, unbreakable. But now it felt like a lie. Everything felt tainted. I grabbed my jacket and keys, needing to get out, to breathe, to clear my head. I drove around for hours, not really going anywhere, just trying to make sense of it all. How could she do this? How could she throw away everything we had for some guy she barely knew? My mind raced with questions, but none of them had answers that would bring me any peace. Eventually, I ended up at Ben's place. Ben and I had been best friends since college, and he was the one person I knew I could talk to about this. When I knocked on his door, it was late, but I didn't care. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and knew something was wrong. Ethan, what's going on, man? He asked, concern written all over his face. I need to talk, I muttered, stepping inside. He didn't ask any more questions, just nodded and led me into the living room. We sat down and I told him everything. How I had suspected for weeks, how I had found the messages, how I had followed her last night and saw her with Jake. Jesus, Ben said, shaking his head. I'm so sorry, man. I can't believe this. Yeah, neither can I said, leaning forward, my hands in my hair. What the hell do I do now? Ben was quiet for a moment, thinking. Look, Ethan, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. She messed up. Big time. You've got every right to be pissed, to feel hurt. But you need to figure out what you want. Do you think you can forgive her? Or is this it for you? I sat there, staring at the floor, trying to process everything. Could I forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? She had been lying to me for months, sneaking around, meeting this guy behind my back. The thought of it made me sick. I don't know, I finally said, my voice hoarse. I don't know if I can get past this. Every time I look at her, all I see is the betrayal. Ben nodded, understanding. I get that, but whatever you decide, you need to do what's best for you. Don't feel like you have to stay with her out of some obligation or guilt. She's the one who made this choice, not you. We talked for a while longer, but I still didn't have any clear answers. When I left Ben's place, it was close to midnight, and I drove home feeling more lost than ever. Part of me wanted to believe we could fix this, that maybe, with time, I could forgive her. But another part of me, the part that had seen her with Jake, laughing, completely at ease, was screaming that it was over. When I got home, the house was dark and silent. Emily had gone to bed, but I didn't go into the bedroom. Couldn't. I slept on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I kept thinking about every lie she had told me, every excuse she had made. How many times had she looked me in the eyes and lied straight to my face? How many nights had she been with him while I was at home, trusting her, believing everything was fine? The next morning, I woke up groggy and disoriented, my back aching from the couch. Emily was in the kitchen, making coffee, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up when she saw me, her face filled with guilt and regret. "Ethan," she said softly, "we need to talk." I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, staring at her, trying to figure out if there was anything left to say. "I'm sorry," she continued, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust. But I love you. I don't want to lose you." I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. "You should have thought about that before you started sneaking around with him." Her face crumpled, and she started crying again. "I know," she whispered. "I made a mistake, a huge mistake. But I'm willing to do anything to fix this. I'll end it with Jake. I'll go to therapy, whatever it takes." I stared at her, the anger bubbling up inside me again. "You should have ended it before it even started, Emily. You should have respected me enough not to do this in the first place." She didn't say anything, just stood there, sobbing quietly. And for the first time in our relationship, I realized I didn't care. Her tears didn't move me. They didn't make me feel sorry for her. They didn't change anything. I pushed away from the counter, shaking my head. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can forgive you." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "Please, Ethan, please don't say that. We can fix this. We can get through this." I sighed, exhausted by it all. "I need some space," I said quietly. "I need time to think." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Okay, I understand." I left the kitchen and went back to the living room, sitting down on the couch where I had spent the night. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing: things would never be the same. Over the next few days, I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but nothing about my life felt normal anymore. Emily kept her distance, giving me the space I had asked for, but I could see the guilt eating away at her. She'd glance at me with those pleading eyes, waiting for some sign that we could fix this, but I wasn't ready. Hell, I wasn't sure if I'd ever be ready. The tension in the house was unbearable. Every room felt heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Even when we weren't talking, the silence between us screamed with everything left unsaid. I was still sleeping on the couch, and the distance between us felt like a chasm that couldn't be bridged. Emily made a point of trying to show me she was ending things with Jake. She stayed home more, didn't go out late anymore, and kept her phone in plain sight like it was some sort of peace offering. But it all felt hollow to me. No matter how hard she tried to prove she was done with him, I couldn't forget what I'd seen. I couldn't unsee them together. One night, about a week after the confrontation, I came home from work late. It had been a long, exhausting day, and all I wanted to do was collapse on the couch. When I walked in, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Emily wasn't in the living room, but her keys were on the table. I assumed she was upstairs, probably in bed, trying to give me space like she had been doing. But something felt off. I don't know what it was, maybe just paranoia, but a part of me started wondering if she had been in contact with Jake again. I told myself I was being ridiculous. She had promised to cut him off, and I hadn't seen anything to suggest otherwise. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Against my better judgment, I went upstairs to check her phone. I knew it was a bad idea. I knew I was walking a fine line between protecting myself and becoming obsessed. But I couldn't help it. When I picked up her phone, my hands were trembling. I opened her messages, scrolling through the familiar list of names. There was nothing out of the ordinary. No texts from Jake. No messages that set off any alarms. I was about to put the phone down, feeling foolish for even checking, when I noticed something in her email app. There was an email from Jake, buried deep in the inbox, like she hadn't deleted it properly. It wasn't recent, maybe a few days old, but the subject line hit me like a punch to the gut. We need to talk. My stomach dropped. I opened the email, my heart racing. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but it was enough to unravel everything I had been holding together. Emily, I can't keep doing this. You can't just cut me off like that. We need to talk about what happened. I know you're trying to work things out with Ethan, but you can't ignore what we had. Please call me. I miss you. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. She hadn't told me about this. She hadn't mentioned that Jake had reached out, that he was still trying to keep their connection alive. I felt sick. After everything, she had still been keeping things from me. I heard footsteps coming down the hall, and I quickly put the phone down. Emily walked into the room, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Hey," she said softly, as if nothing was wrong. "I didn't hear you come in. How was your day?" I couldn't even look at her. "You lied to me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her face fell instantly. What? What are you talking about?" I picked up her phone and held it out to her. "Jake emailed you." The blood drained from her face as she realized what I had seen. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She just stood there, staring at me, knowing there was no way to talk her way out of this. "You told me you cut him off," I continued, my voice rising. "You promised me you were done with him, but here he is still trying to get you back. And you didn't say a word." "I didn't respond," she said quickly, tears welling up in her eyes. "Ethan, I swear I didn't respond to him. I ignored it." "But you didn't tell me," I shot back. "You kept this from me. After everything, you still lied." Her tears started falling, but I didn't care. I was beyond feeling sorry for her. I was done. Done with the lies, done with the games, done with pretending we could fix this. "I don't know how many more lies you've told me, Emily, and I don't care anymore," I said, my voice cold. "I can't do this. I'm done." "Please, Ethan," she sobbed, reaching for me. "I'm begging you. Don't leave. We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes." But I shook my head, stepping away from her. "No, you've had your chances. I'm done giving you more." I walked out of the room, her sobs echoing behind me, but I didn't look back. Couldn't. I had already made my decision. Leaving the room, leaving her, should have felt like a victory, like I was finally taking control of my life again. But as I walked down the stairs, past the photos of us hanging on the walls, I couldn't shake the emptiness inside me. I was angry, sure, but more than anything, I felt tired, exhausted, like I had been carrying the weight of this mess for so long, and it had finally crushed me. I grabbed my jacket, keys, and phone and walked out the door without another word. Emily's sobs faded as I closed the door behind me, but they echoed in my mind. Part of me wanted to turn back, to at least try and talk it through one last time. But the other part, the part that had been betrayed over and over again, told me there was no point. The damage was done, too deep to be repaired. I got in the car and started driving, not really sure where I was going. I just needed to get away from the house, from the weight of it all. The streets were quiet, the kind of eerie silence that only comes in the middle of the night. It felt like the world had stopped moving, like I was the only one left. Eventually, I ended up at a park. It wasn't far from our house, just a place I used to go to clear my head. I parked the car and walked to a bench, sitting down under the dim streetlights. The night was cold, and the wind cut through my jacket, but I didn't care. I needed the sting of the cold to wake me up, to remind me that this wasn't just some nightmare I could shake off. This was real. I sat there for what felt like hours, just thinking, going over every moment, every lie, every excuse, trying to figure out how the hell I got here, how I ended up sitting in a park alone, my marriage in pieces. At some point, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from Emily, begging me to come back, to forgive her again. But it wasn't her. It was Ben. "You good, man? Haven't heard from you in a few days." I stared at the screen, wondering how to respond. Was I good? No, I wasn't. Everything was falling apart, and I didn't know how to fix it, or if I even wanted to. I thought about ignoring the message, but then I realized I needed to talk to someone. I couldn't keep this all bottled up anymore. "Can I crash at your place tonight?" I typed, hitting send before I could change my mind. The response came almost instantly. "Of course. Doors unlocked. Come over whenever." I stood up, my body stiff from sitting on the bench for so long. I didn't want to go back to that house, not tonight, maybe not ever. I walked back to my car, feeling slightly lighter knowing I had somewhere to go, someone who wouldn't judge me or ask too many questions. When I got to Ben's place, the lights were still on, and he opened the door as soon as I knocked. He took one look at my face and didn't say a word, just stepped aside and let me in. That's the thing about Ben, he never pushes, never asks too much. He knows when I need space, and right now that's exactly what I needed. I crashed on his couch, staring at the ceiling. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Ben sat down in the chair across from me, opening 2 beers and handing me one. We didn't say anything for a while, just sat there in the quiet, letting the weight of everything settle between us. Finally, after what felt like forever, I spoke. "It's over." Ben nodded, not looking surprised. "Yeah, I figured as much. I can't do it anymore." I continued, my voice raw. "I tried, you know? I really tried. But she kept lying. She kept hiding things. Even after she promised to end it, she didn't tell me everything." I found another message from him tonight. Ben took a long sip of his beer, his brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, man. That's rough. I don't know how we got here," I said, shaking my head. "I thought we were good. I thought we were solid. But she's been lying to me for months. And now I don't even know who she is anymore." Ben didn't have any easy answers, and honestly, I didn't expect him to. There wasn't anything he could say that would make this better. But just having him there, just knowing I wasn't alone in this mess, made it a little easier to breathe. "You gonna file for divorce?" he asked after a while, his voice careful, like he didn't want to push me too hard. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know. Probably. I don't see any other way out of this." He nodded, not saying anything for a moment. "Look, whatever you decide, just know I'm here. All right? You don't have to go through this alone." I nodded, grateful for his support. But deep down, I knew that, at the end of the day, this was something I'd have to face on my own. No one else could make this decision for me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the endless nights of wondering where it all went wrong. But there was one thing I knew for sure: I couldn't go back. Not now. Not after everything. Tomorrow I'd start figuring out what came next. The next morning, I woke up on Ben's couch, feeling disoriented. For a moment, I forgot where I was, forgot why I wasn't at home in my own bed. But then everything came rushing back. Emily, Jake, the lies. The reality hit me like a sledgehammer. Ben was already awake, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, scrolling through his phone. When he saw me come in, he gave me a nod, offering a quiet, "Morning." "Morning?" I muttered, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. My back ached from the couch, but that was the least of my problems. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down across from Ben. We didn't talk much at first, just sipped our drinks in silence, the weight of everything still hanging between us. I wasn't ready for small talk, and Ben seemed to know that. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he broke the silence. "So, what's the plan?" I stared into my coffee, not really sure how to answer. "I don't know," I admitted. I think I need to file for divorce. There's no fixing this." Ben nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting that. "Yeah, that sounds like the right move. You've given her enough chances, man. At some point, you gotta do what's best for you." "Yeah." I agreed, though the words felt hollow. I knew divorce was the right option, but it didn't make the decision any easier. I had built my life with Emily. We had plans, buying a house, starting a family. And now it was all falling apart. Ben leaned back in his chair, watching me. "You've got to take the next step, Ethan. You can't stay in limbo forever." He was right. I couldn't keep dragging this out. The longer I waited, the more it would tear me apart. But there was a part of me that still couldn't believe it had come to this. Divorce. It felt so final, so permanent. After breakfast, I called a lawyer. I didn't know much about the process, but I knew I couldn't do this alone. The lawyer listened to my situation, asked a few questions, and explained what the next steps would be. It all sounded so mechanical, so straightforward. But nothing about this felt straightforward. By the time I hung up the phone, the weight of what I was about to do settled in. This was really happening. My marriage was over, and now I had to make it official. That night, I went back to the house to grab some of my things. Walking through the door, everything felt wrong. The house was eerily quiet, and the air felt heavy with tension. Emily wasn't home, thankfully, but her presence still lingered everywhere. Her shoes by the door, her jacket draped over the chair. I couldn't stand it. I started packing a bag, grabbing whatever clothes I could find. It felt surreal, like I was on autopilot, just going through the motions. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something that would stop me in my tracks. Photos of us together, laughing, happy. They felt like relics from another life, a life that no longer existed. As I finished packing, I heard the front door open. Emily walked in, her face pale when she saw me standing there with my bag. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice shaky. "What are you doing?" I straightened up, trying to keep my voice steady. "I came to get some of my things." She looked at the bag in my hand, and the reality of the situation seemed to hit her all at once. Her eyes filled with tears, and she took a step toward me. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, unable to meet her eyes. "It's too late, Emily. You've had your chances. You kept lying to me. There's nothing left to fix." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. I know I broke your trust. But please, Ethan, don't leave me." I felt a pang of guilt, seeing her like this, but I pushed it down. I couldn't let her tears sway me. "Not this time." "I can't stay," I said quietly. "I'm filing for divorce." Her sobs grew louder, and she dropped to her knees, clutching at my arm. "Please, Ethan, don't leave me. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. We can fix this." I pulled away from her, feeling the weight of every word. "Love isn't enough, Emily. Trust is everything, and you destroyed that. I can't live like this anymore." I turned away, heading for the door. Emily's cries echoed behind me, but I kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. When I reached the car, I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I had done it. I had finally walked away. But as I drove off, the weight of everything settled in. I wasn't just leaving Emily. I was leaving behind the life we had built together, the future we had planned. And even though I knew it was the right decision, it still hurt like hell. Driving away from the house didn't feel like a victory. It didn't feel like relief either. It just felt empty. I thought I'd feel stronger, like I was finally taking control of my life again. But as I drove down the dark streets, leaving behind everything I thought I knew, all I felt was the weight of what I was losing. I didn't go back to Ben's place right away. Instead, I drove aimlessly, trying to clear my head, but the thoughts kept coming. I had done the right thing, hadn't I? Walking away, choosing myself after everything she'd put me through. It was the only option left. But no matter how many times I told myself that, it didn't make the decision any less painful. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the kind of place we used to go to after long nights out. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat in the car for a minute, staring at the neon sign, before heading inside. I wasn't hungry, but I needed a place to sit, to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. The diner was nearly empty, save for an old couple in the corner and the waitress behind the counter. I slid into a booth, ordered a coffee, and stared out the window, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. The world outside kept moving, cars passing by, people going about their business, while my life felt like it had come to a screeching halt. My phone buzzed on the table, and I knew without looking that it was Emily. She had been texting me nonstop since I left, but I hadn't responded. Couldn't. There was nothing left to say. I picked up the phone, half expecting another long message about how sorry she was, how much she loved me. But it wasn't a text this time. It was a missed call. Emily had left a voicemail. For a few minutes, I just stared at the screen, debating whether or not to listen. Part of me didn't want to hear her voice again, didn't want to deal with the guilt of leaving her behind. But another part of me, the part that was still raw and hurting, needed to know what she had to say. I hit play. Ethan. Her voice cracked as soon as she said my name. I don't know if you'll even listen to this, but I need you to know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know what to do without you. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep listening. I love you, Ethan. I know I didn't show it. I know I messed up in ways I can never take back. But please don't walk away like this. I can't lose you. Not like this. The voicemail ended, leaving me sitting there with a lump in my throat. It wasn't enough. Her apologies, her tears. They weren't enough to erase what she had done. She had broken something that couldn't be fixed with words. I put the phone down, staring at the coffee in front of me. It had gone cold, just like everything else in my life. No matter how much I had wanted to believe we could fix things, deep down I knew it was over. And nothing she said could change that. Ben called a few minutes later, his voice steady as always. You all right? You haven't checked in. Yeah, I said, though I didn't feel all right. I just needed some space. Figured as much, he replied. Look, if you need to crash here again, you're welcome to. Stay as long as you need. I appreciate it, I said. I'll probably head over soon. Take your time. I'm here. After I hung up, I sat in the booth for a while longer, watching the diner fill up with late-night customers. None of them knew what I was going through. To them, I was just another guy with a coffee and a faraway look in his eyes. But inside, I felt like I was drowning. Eventually, I got up, left a few bucks on the table, and headed back to my car. I drove aimlessly for a while longer, my mind buzzing with 1,000 thoughts but no real answers. What was next? What the hell was I supposed to do now? I ended up back at Ben's place, exhausted but too wired to sleep. Ben didn't ask any questions when I came in, just tossed me a blanket for the couch and headed to bed. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The next few days blurred together. I went through the motions, woke up, went to work, came back to Ben's place. Emily kept calling, kept texting, but I didn't respond. I couldn't deal with it yet. I knew I had to, eventually. We had to figure out what to do with the house, the finances, everything we had shared. But not now. I wasn't ready. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, I opened my phone and scrolled through the photos of us. Emily and I on vacation, at friends' weddings, laughing at some dumb inside joke. It felt like another lifetime, like I was looking at someone else's life, someone else's memories. Those people in the photos didn't exist anymore. I deleted them all. It was harder than I thought it would be, but as soon as they were gone, I felt lighter, like I had taken the first real step toward moving on. I wasn't sure what the future held for me now. I wasn't sure of anything, really, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living in the past. Emily had made her choices, and now I was making mine. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, awkward phone calls, and endless questions from friends who didn't know what to say. Everyone had heard the news by now. Emily had called some of them, desperate to explain her side of things, but I wasn't interested in hearing what she told them. I didn't care if she was trying to paint herself as the victim or admitting her mistakes. The truth was, I just didn't have the energy for it anymore. I met with the lawyer to start the divorce process. Sitting in that office, answering questions about assets, finances, and dividing everything we'd built, it felt surreal. This was the woman I had thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, and now we were reducing our marriage to a series of legal documents and signatures. I felt like I should be more upset, more emotional about it all. But in some ways, I was relieved. This was the first real step in taking my life back, and even though it hurt, I knew it was the right thing to do. One afternoon, after yet another round of emails with the lawyer, I decided to go back to the house. I hadn't been there since I'd left with my bag. But there were still things I needed to sort out. Personal stuff, things I didn't want to leave behind. The thought of going back made my stomach turn, but I couldn't avoid it forever. When I pulled up to the house, it looked the same as ever. The same front yard we used to spend weekends working on together, the same front porch where we'd sit and talk for hours. But now it felt like a shell, like all the warmth and memories had been drained out of it. I walked in and was hit with the familiar smell of home. Except it didn't feel like home anymore. The silence was suffocating. Emily wasn't there, and I was glad for that. I didn't want another emotional scene, another round of her begging me to reconsider. I just needed to get my things and leave. I went upstairs to the bedroom, the place where everything had started to fall apart. As I packed my clothes, I noticed how bare everything felt. Emily had clearly started packing her own things, too. The closet, once filled with both of our belongings, was now half empty. It made the whole place feel hollow, like we had already moved on, but the house hadn't caught up yet. As I packed, I found an old photo album buried under some clothes. I hadn't seen it in years. Curious, I opened it and was immediately hit with memories. Vacations, birthdays, random moments of us just being happy. The smiles in those pictures felt foreign now, like I was looking at strangers. I flipped through the pages, feeling a mix of sadness and detachment. How had it all gone so wrong? We had been happy once, hadn't we? But the more I looked at the photos, the more I realized something. Those were just snapshots. They didn't tell the whole story. They didn't capture the long, slow drift that had brought us to where we were now. Those moments were real, sure, but they were part of a larger picture that I had been blind to. I put the album down, deciding I didn't need to take it with me. That life was over now, and holding on to those memories wasn't going to change that. As I finished packing, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another message from the lawyer, but it wasn't. It was from Emily. I know we have to go through all this legal stuff, but can we talk? Please? Just one last time. I stared at the message for a while, unsure how to respond. Part of me didn't want to talk to her at all. What was left to say? But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, the part that hated leaving things unresolved, felt like maybe, just maybe, I should hear her out. I sat on the edge of the bed, my bag packed, and texted back. Fine. I'll meet you tomorrow. Same place we used to go for coffee. Her response came almost instantly. Thank you. I'll be there. I sighed, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. I didn't know what I was hoping to get out of this conversation. Closure, maybe, or at least some sense that we could walk away from this without hating each other. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop a little early. It was a small place we used to go to on weekends, back when things were simple and we didn't have to question everything. Sitting there, I felt a weird sense of nostalgia, like I was stepping back into a version of my life that didn't exist anymore. Emily walked in a few minutes later. She looked nervous, her eyes red like she hadn't slept much. We sat down, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I didn't know if you'd actually come, she said finally, her voice soft. I almost didn't, I admitted, staring into my coffee. But I figured we should at least talk. She nodded, biting her lip. I know I've said it 100 times, but I'm sorry, Ethan. I know I messed everything up. I know, I said, my voice flat, but that doesn't change anything. She looked down, wiping away a tear. I don't expect it to. I wanted to say goodbye. I don't want us to leave things like this, with all this anger between us. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. I don't hate you, Emily. I'm done. I can't keep going over this in my head, wondering what went wrong. I need to move on. She nodded, wiping her eyes again. I understand. I miss you. I miss us. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. We sat there for a while longer, talking about the logistics of the divorce, about the house, about everything we'd have to figure out in the coming months. It was awkward, but it was necessary. When we finally stood up to leave, Emily reached out and hugged me. Felt like a goodbye, a real one this time. And as I walked away, I felt lighter. Like maybe, just maybe, I could finally start to move on. Walking out of that coffee shop felt like closing the door on a chapter of my life I thought would last forever. It wasn't easy. Hell, none of this was easy. But for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt like I could finally breathe again. There was no going back. And as hard as that was to accept, it also felt like the first step toward something new. The divorce papers came a few weeks later. The process was mechanical, sign here, initial there, and soon enough, everything that had been built over years of marriage was reduced to a few legal documents. It was surreal knowing that this was how it ended. Not with a big fight or dramatic goodbye, but with paperwork. Once the divorce was finalized, I officially moved out of the house. I found a small apartment downtown, something temporary while I figured out what came next. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and thin walls, but it was mine. I spent the first few nights in the apartment just getting used to the silence. There was no Emily, no reminders of what had happened. Just me, alone, trying to piece my life back together. Ben helped me move in. He didn't say much, just carried boxes and cracked a few jokes when things got too quiet. That's the thing about Ben. He never tried to fix things with words. He just showed up, and sometimes that was all I needed. After we finished unpacking, we sat on the floor of my new apartment, drinking beer and staring at the empty walls. "Not bad," Ben said, glancing around. "It's a good start." I nodded, taking a sip of my drink. "Yeah, it's not much, but it feels right, like I can finally move on." He clinked his bottle against mine. To moving on. As the weeks went by, I started settling into my new life. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when I felt the weight of everything that had happened. But little by little, I started finding myself again. I got back into old hobbies I had abandoned over the years. Photography, running, even reading. I spent more time with friends, reconnected with people I hadn't seen in ages. It was like I was slowly remembering who I was before the marriage, before everything got so complicated. One afternoon, while I was out taking photos at the park, I ran into an old friend from college. Megan and I had been close back in the day, but we had lost touch after I got married. She was always a free spirit, constantly traveling and chasing new adventures. We ended up grabbing coffee and catching up on everything that had happened in our lives. Talking to Megan felt refreshing. There was no pressure, no baggage, just two old friends reconnecting. We talked for hours, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the past hanging over me. It was just easy. As the weeks turned into months, I realized something important. I wasn't broken anymore. Yes, Emily's betrayal had hurt. It had shattered the life I thought I'd have. But I had survived it. I had picked up the pieces and started building something new. Emily and I still had to communicate every now and then, mostly about the house or other loose ends from the divorce. But those conversations were short and to the point. The emotional weight was gone. I didn't feel the same anger or sadness I once did. I didn't feel much of anything at all, really, and maybe that was a good thing. One evening, I went for a run through the neighborhood, something I hadn't done in years. The air was cool, the sun setting behind the trees, and as I ran, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. My thoughts weren't consumed by the past or by what went wrong. I wasn't replaying old memories or wondering how things could have been different. I was just present. By the time I finished my run, I stood at the top of a hill, looking out over the city as the lights started to flicker on. For the first time in what felt like forever, I realized I was okay. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe I'd find someone new. Maybe I wouldn't. But for the first time, I wasn't worried about it. I was content being on my own, figuring out who I was outside of a relationship. And that was enough. As I stood there, watching the city come alive below me, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Life had a way of tearing things down, but it also had a way of giving you the chance to rebuild. And that's exactly what I was doing, rebuilding. Maybe I'd never get all the answers I wanted. Maybe I'd never understand why Emily had done what she did. But that was okay. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need validation from anyone else. I had found it in myself. And that was all I needed.